They don't listen to all the parts of the chest where you hear heart sounds or murmurs best. It really is becoming a lost art, and yet it's something that you can do even if you don't have a lot of money and you don't have a lot of equipment available to you.
Well, you go into the history, but I know I've seen some historical stethoscopes in my time. Could you kind of just give us a little background on how it all came about, if you
Well, I
would
think it
mind?
used to be just a tube of rolled up paper that you could put one end on the patient's chest and the other end in your ear, and then it became more sophisticated with the two rubber tubes going to your ear and connecting to the chest piece, which has two parts really. It has a part that's better for high frequency sounds and one that's better for low frequency sounds. There are amplifying stethoscopes available now for the doctor who's hard of hearing, but still it's a simple thing. It's just a connection between your ears and the patient's chest. And the most important part of the stethoscope being the part that's between your two ears that you're supposed to be using to think about what you're hearing and about, perhaps even more importantly, the history that you heard by taking it firsthand from the patient.
Absolutely amazing. We have got Dr. Jane Orient with us today. She joins us live here on Talk America Live this week. And Dawn, you teach journalism, and are you finding that much like with the stethoscope, it's a lost art of certain tools that you would think all journalists would have? Are you finding that the same thing that Dr. Orient's finding as well?
Well, yeah, in fact, but I'm lucky. Like I say, I'm lucky that every doctor that I go to, and there are a few, but they all first thing they do is go out and check me with the stethoscope. It's kind of reassuring. I wonder if there's a study. I was going to ask our guest a different question.
Yes, go ahead, jump in there.
Well, what made you decide to write such a book? Which, if it's in its fifth edition, then it must be a very valued book. So, can you tell us a little bit about how you came to do this? And I know our audience would like to know.
Well, I've always been interested in interviewing and physical diagnosis. I mean, those are the main tools that you use to approach the patient. And before you just shotgun the patient with all kinds of laboratory tests, you need to focus in on what the possibilities are and what is the most efficient and cost-effective way to figure out what's going on. The first edition of Sapira's was written by Joseph Sapira. We worked on it together, and I was the editor and author of part of the first edition. He was an academic physician who taught internal medicine and was very, very interested in these techniques that are much in disuse, like listening and tapping on the chest, and combining the listening and the tapping on the chest, and what the early physicians like Laennec, the lung sounds that they described. In fact, if you read some old books that are about physicians, they will tell how back in the old days, physicians would listen very, very carefully to the chest and be able to diagnose tuberculosis and tell how it was coming along and exactly what parts of the lungs were affected, and be very good at prognosticating how the patient was improving or not. So it's just been a long time interest of mine.
Well, no, we're certainly glad about it. But let me ask you this question: given the rules of the way medical reimbursement goes, where the doctors have sometimes just 7 or 8 minutes per patient, what you're asking is in effect cutting into their time for other things. Is there any way of easing the rules so that doctors are encouraged to spend more time?
I don't see how any doctor can make a good diagnosis on a patient in 7 or 8 minutes. And it takes that long to introduce yourself and talk to the patient and just find out basic things like how are you, to have the patient get undressed partly, or to have time to listen to the patient's question. It's just impossible to do a good job in that amount of time. And I think that if doctors are in a situation where that's where they get paid for, I mean, they get paid for what they input into the computer, all the bullet points and all the things that may be unimportant or have nothing to do with reality or with helping to make the diagnosis. They're trying to do the impossible, and what doctors need to do is declare independence and get out of the managed care situations in which they are on that kind of treadmill.
Oh, how do you really feel? Thank you, Doctor. I mean, um, it's something. You talk to doctors and they say they want to do a good job, but they're hamstrung by the rules and regulations, and you see people trying to kind of mash the various parts of our healthcare system. Yet we still manage to have, in my opinion, the best healthcare system. What do you say to that, Doctor?
Well, I think it may be better than other places, but that doesn't mean that it's very good or that it's anywhere like what it could be. And it is certainly more expensive because a lot of the stuff that we call healthcare has gone into this huge $3.8 trillion industry that's mainly shuffling money around rather than doing anything that is of value to any sick person. So I think that we have a long way to go from improvement to improve, and if we do not restore the patient-physician relationship, then we're doing very bad medicine. We're missing diagnoses. We're doing an appalling job of taking care of patients' real needs.
Couldn't agree with you more, Doctor. But let me ask you this: a man who's come up with this new device almost looks like the device that appeared in Star Trek. Where the doctor could scan somebody and tell what was wrong with him or her. But it seems to me, if it was so good, why isn't it universally adopted?
Well, there are lots of technical gizmos that have wonderful capabilities, but generally they're quite limited, and they are very expensive. And the stethoscope is maybe old, but it is reliable. It is inexpensive. It can be frequently used. It can be used anywhere. You don't have to be in a tertiary medical center. I think there's a lot of potential in biochemistry and in metabolic profiling that is not being used to the fullest. But I think as we're going to pitch all our old tools away from just to adopt all the latest technical wizardry. And for one thing, we have no long-term information on just how this is going to turn out for the patients.
Yeah, that's the real thing, is what's best for the patient. And I just found out an interesting rule is that you can only have one, if you're in Medicare, you can only have one MRI a year. If you want a second one, you got to pay for it yourself. And a lot of people apparently don't do that second MRI, which leads to complications. I was just told a story yesterday about that, and scared the daylights out of me.
Well, you may develop a condition that's completely new just after you had your old previous MRI, or if you have cancer or something like that, you'd really like to know how things are progressing. Is your treatment making you better, or is the cancer just galloping along? And yeah, I think it's often very good to have serial frequent tests. One reason that people don't want to pay for it themselves, of course, is because it is some places outrageously expensive. And yet there are other places where if you shop around and ask how much does this cost, they'll say maybe $350, and you can have it today instead of waiting and waiting and waiting for the insurance company to agree to pay something for it. And what they pay may be a deep, dark secret, but it's probably far more than would be obtainable if we had an MRI center on every corner.
Very definitely. But I found out an interesting thing. Well, in New Jersey, you cannot have a blood test unless the doctor orders it. Yet in many states, you can walk in and have a blood test whenever you want it. And the difference in price, I was just shocked.
Yeah, I think that really is a very bad idea to force you to get a doctor's order for everything. For one thing, you have to pay the doctor.
Yes.
To write the order. But in Arizona, you can walk into the lab, and they have a menu of tests, and the price is there, and you can write your own order.
Yes. Which makes sense. But again, this is New Jersey. What can I say? I hope we have a governor who just said if taxes is an issue with you, you don't belong in this state. So what can I tell you?
A lot of people are deciding they don't belong.
Yes, I don't mean to jump far, but you sound like such a knowledgeable person about all of this. If you had your druthers, if you know that expression, what would you change in the system to make it better?
I think we need to get rid of third-party payment. That means we're always somebody else that's paying the bill. There's always a middleman. We need to go back to the days when insurance was like auto insurance and fire insurance. The premium was reasonable. You paid it once or twice a year. You hope never to have any contact with the insurance company again, and you paid for routine things out of pocket. I think that just filing an insurance claim probably doubles or triples the cost of everything, particularly of things that should be really cheap. I mean, why does it make any sense whatsoever to have somebody write a check to pay for your flu shot? I mean, it takes just as much time and expense to process a $10 claim as a $1,000 claim. So it's ridiculous to have all of these clerks in the middle between you and the doctor, and then they're going to be deciding what you can have and what you can't have.
Amen. I was told that 33 cents of every dollar spent in the health care was for paperwork.
Well, it may be more than that, actually. Plus, there are all kinds of perverse incentives. If you have paid a huge premium every single month for your medical insurance, well, of course you want to get your money's worth. So naturally, you want insurance to cover everything. But if you kept that money in your pocket, I really think we should price things in units like percentage of your monthly insurance premium. It would make most medical care look very cheap, and you're going to be asking yourself, why am I paying those guys that amount of money for something I hope never to use?
I couldn't agree with you more. What do you think about HSAs?
Oh, I think they're a wonderful idea. But the problem is that the instant they were enacted, the special interests started piling on and setting up such regulations that gave the managed care industry much more control over them. It greatly limited their usefulness to patients, and so they were really crippled from the start. We really ought to have everybody have the right to the same tax advantages for any way they pay for their medical care, not just if they get it through an employer-owned insurance plan. And then you have catastrophic insurance, reasonably priced for the really big-ticket items. Everything else comes out of your medical savings account, which should have the same tax advantage as, union members now get through their employer-sponsored plans.
I couldn't agree with you more. It shocked me to find out that the average deductible now is close to the amount that that is the beginning point for HSAs. So
well, it used to be that a high deductible plan like that would be very inexpensive, and it was the economically sensible thing for everybody to buy. Just the savings in premiums would pay your deductible. But now you've got both sky-high premiums and a sky-high deductible, and that's because of the Affordable Care Act, the Unaffordable Care Act, really, that piles on all of these minimum essential benefits, these mandates that you have to pay for, whether they're really of value or not, along with this guaranteed issue of community rating plan, which means the insurance company cannot rate you by your risk, but is forcing you to pay for people who are far more expensive. You know, they didn't buy insurance before they were sick. They have all kinds of lifestyle problems, and so you were being forced to pay for bad risks. Just like if they did that to automobile insurance, you would be paying extra for drunk drivers.
Mm. Absolutely. You are right on about that. Before we go further, please tell us the name of your book again and where people can get it.
It's Sapira's, S-A-P-I-R-A, apostrophe S, Art and Science of Bedside Diagnosis. And it's published by Wolters Kluwer, W-O-L-T-E-R-S-K-L-U-W-E-R. They have a website. You can also get it on Amazon.
I think it's so important. Do you think that I remember the doctors of my youth. I'm 76, so I go back a ways. And when they came to the house and they had a manner, a bedside manner, and we seem to have lost that approach. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right. We have, and that's because the doctor is usually working for somebody other than the patient. He's working for the insurance company. And whether he gets paid or not depends on what he writes on that claims form. Whether you like it or not, or whether you're helped or not, really doesn't make very much difference. And the doctor's under a lot of pressure to conform to what the insurance company wants and to process enough patients through to collect enough money. But there are doctors who now have direct primary care practices, it's called. Many of them will make house calls. Many of them will be available to you when you need them, instead of saying, well, we've got an appointment 3 months from now. You really need to be looking for a doctor who's working for you and not the insurance company.
Well, I'm into that as well. I'm very fortunate to have my two primary doctors are like that, and it's really a joy to go into their office. It's a joy to work with them. I'm a long-time diabetic, so you can tell that I need extra. What is TLC? A little bit of tender loving care. And they do give it. It's amazing.
Well, doctors who are working for their patients and the patient's paying them, it's a mutual thing. The doctor's glad to see the patient's glad to see the doctor. They value each other. Whereas if you're just another number that has to be rushed through that day, it's different.
Well, it's interesting. My doctor only accepts Medicare, and he accepts Medicare patients, and I might say he's on Fifth Avenue in New York City, but it doesn't seem that he does anything but take enough time to make sure that he always asks at the end, is there anything I haven't asked you that you want to talk about? That alone is worth the visit, because sometimes you're hesitant to tell a doctor something. But when he asks, I'm sorry, you talk.
No, that's a very important question the doctor should always ask, and it sounds like you found a real treasure.
Oh, I couldn't. I believe me, I really do. And what's more, he's younger than me, so hopefully, he'll have a practice up until the time I don't need him. But it's been but the time it took to find them when my other doctor died, and what I went through, told me a lot. And I live in, very short, close to New York City, so I'm open to to some of the best doctors in the world. But um, let me ask you a different question, which is a little bit loaded. But I had a condition that doctors could not find. I was getting fevers, etc., and for 3 to 5 years, I couldn't find an answer. And I went to the Mayo Clinic, and they found the answer in a 2-hour session, and found the solution. Well, there are certain places like the Mayo that, to me, seem to take on the tough cases. Would you like to comment on that at all?
Well, I think that, yes, there are some excellent facilities that come up with diagnoses that other people had failed to reach, and I think that is one of the treasures that we have in the United States. We're in a place where there is free enterprise, and their patients do have the ability to seek a second opinion from the doctor that they want instead of the one that they're assigned to. In Canada, they even have a lottery to get signed up with a family physician, and you may dare not disagree with your family physician, because if he kicks you out, you may not be able to find another one, and you can't get in to see a specialist without a referral from that primary care doctor. So I think if you're in Canada and you want to go someplace like Mayo, you have to come to the United States.
Oh, well, what I found interesting, that there were four on their channels. Their in-hospital channels with 4 channels of in Arabic there, and there were 3 floors in which were financed by Arab countries. So I guess they all know to come there when something happens rather than Europe. And I always found that interesting.
And it should tell you something, shouldn't
it? Should tell people around the world. You know, this is an enjoyable time with me, but I want to make sure that our audience learns more about you. Are you still practicing, Doctor?
I do still have a small practice. It's totally third-party free. I'm not enrolled in Medicare. I'm quite willing to see Medicare patients, but they cannot get any reimbursement for Medicare if they see me. So I think I keep my fees reasonable, and patients know ahead of time what they're looking at. So that you're not necessarily the most popular girl in the school if people have to pay to see you. But on the other hand, if you're not worth anything, maybe people don't want to see you anyway.
Right. Well, but it's sometimes, given the, I remember when a doctor's visit was $2.50, and I have to tell you, my mother couldn't afford it. She had a bad back, and one of her coworkers gave her the money to go to see the doctor. Obviously, this is 1948, but now it's the rates are astronomical, and to do a procedure is sometimes $5,000.
Well, it depends. It doesn't need to be that much. Well, for one thing, of course, $2.50 would be probably worth 10 times as much today. Now the dollar has lost that much value.
Yeah.
But you can find, if you can find out what things cost, there are people who are really quite reasonable and quite good. And the cost is not necessarily a measure of the quality. Sometimes the highest quality things are the lowest price. You just really have to look around.
Yes. Jiggy, do you want to jump in over here?
Well, Dr. Orient, you've got some incredible books here. What are some of your goals for your books?
Goals for the books? Well,
yes.
I guess I got infected with a chronic disease a few decades ago, and I can't stop writing. It's like an illness. I have to do it. So it's not. I write what I have to write. I write what seems important, a message that I think people ought to hear. That's all. That's the only goal, is to communicate what I think is important.
Fantastic. We have got Dr. Jane Orient with us today. She has got some incredible books. She has written a piece that we have on our website about stethoscopes, and so, you know, with technology and the way things are going, do you think we're ever going to get to the point where where people don't use a stethoscope, don't use some of these different things? Are we headed that direction?
Oh, I think that we may be, especially since the young students do not have the opportunity to learn, although there are all kinds of excellent aids these days, recordings of heart sounds that you can study on your own. But if you spend all your time in the hospital, stuck in a conference room looking at a computer, and you very seldom see a real life patient who might have something that's interesting to listen to, then these skills will atrophy, and that's one reason why I've kept working on SAPARA's Art and Science of Bedside Diagnosis for all these years. Is even though it's not as popular, the most popular thing, it sells better in India actually than here, it is to keep alive this information that was acquired over the years by the very dedicated and gifted people.
Jiggy, can I jump in here?
Yes, go ahead.
You brought up a very interesting point. I remember when I was covering Africa that just about every doctor that I ever encountered always had the stethoscope around his or her neck. And I remember in this village, and I forget what country, where the doctor said it was the only instrument she had left in her bag of tricks, but she said it was oftentimes enough. I hadn't remembered that until you mentioned about the fact. Why do you think it sells so well in India?
I don't know. I guess people do learn English there. They're not stuck with just one language like we are here. And there are many, many well-trained physicians in India. And a lot of these physical diagnostic tools are, as you say, the only things that are accessible to the doctors.
Well, is your book also available as an e-book, or does only as a printed book?
If you buy the printed book, you have access to the e-book that you can install on various devices.
Well, that makes sense, because it seems no doctor I've run across over the years, in recent years, has a book. They all seem to have these pads or other devices, and always referring to that. Do you think that also helps to break down the usage of the stethoscope?
Oh, I think that you can learn about the stethoscope from an iPad, same as from a printed book. I think that just people are learning to disdain things that are simple, and to put more faith in technology than it really is worth. Like, one of the things there is in the book is examples of diagnoses that were made by people with simple observation and hands-on things that were missed by fancy MRI scans.
Well, I know my doctor makes me walk every time and look at how I walk, and sometimes make a diagnosis. I have a bad back, and he can. He says, "Well, you got this, and this wrong," and the MRI proves it. But I'm always amazed. Of course, he's experienced, but I'm always amazed. So I guess there's another example for you.
Well, that we do. The book does go into gait disorders and things like that too. It tells of this one very famous neurologist who had his examining room at the end of the hall, and he made the diagnosis just listening to the patient walk down the hall.
That's amazing. You know, someone said that being a medical doctor sometimes is a black art because you're really depending on your experience. What do you say to that?
I think it's both an art and a science. That there are aspects of both, and you really need both of them.
But then again, we seem to be also a nation where we're asking doctors to specialize rather than be a general physician. Aren't there some, and I don't want to be quoted because I can't remember, but I thought I read that doctors are not becoming general doctors, but rather specialists more and more.
Oh, I think that's a function of this third-party payment system, that general physicians are not worth much in the eyes of the insurance company, and they prefer to replace them with mid-level practitioners with much less training, and the doctors are on such a treadmill that they can't really practice their art the way that it should be practiced, so their life is so very frustrating. But with the development of these direct primary care things, I think we'll see more and more physicians wanting to get back to that kind of practice.
Well, I'll go in another direction because I have a friend of mine who founded ELAM, which is a program to teach women doctors how to become administrators and to grow inside medical schools and hospitals. And she's just retiring for 20 years. But what have you noticed the difference, if you haven't noticed any difference in how women are entering and managing in the medical field over the course of your career?
Well, there are many more women in medicine now than there used to be. Only about 10% of my medical class was women, and now they're at least half. And they have different requirements to do other demands in their family life, and maybe they put more value on important things like their children instead of climbing the career ladder. So they do have different priorities. They have a different approach. I mean, they're just, men and women are different.
Thank God. In a positive sense, I meant it. But let me ask you the question: having children and being mindful of children oftentimes impedes the career of female doctors. Is there any way we can alleviate the situation, in your opinion?
Well, I think that medicine is a calling. It's a vocation. I think we shouldn't look upon it as a career where you climb up the ladder and you get more responsibility and less contact with patients. That I think women physicians do very, very well as physicians. Maybe they are less inclined to do administration, but that's a good thing. So I think that we're just too focused on the status symbols and the trappings that come along with a career, and we've forgotten what medicine is really about.
Well, that's an interesting point. I was talking to my doctor about that, and his feeling was that many doctors seem not to think of it as not as a calling, but rather as a means to a financial end. And he was a little worried about that.
Well, that's how you see it. Then you're probably going to be really unhappy in medicine because it's no longer a guarantee of having a stable and lucrative practice.
Well, why do you say that, if I may ask?
Well, because you are dependent on third-party insurers, and they're all interested in the bottom line, and they're cutting at physician pay, and especially if you're an independent practice, and half of the revenue that comes in is spent on your overhead. If they cut your revenue by 10%, it cuts your pay by 20%. There are more and more regulations that you have to comply with. Insurance is more and more expensive. And doctors are really susceptible to pressures that they're actually going to be out the door if they're not productive enough from the insurance company's standpoint, or if they don't comply with what the insurer wants them to do. So doctors really are kind of stressed out as far as even being able to keep a job.
Well, we all seem to be. Do you also think that I read a statistic that problems with drug addiction and alcoholism amongst doctors seems to be increasing? And someone said it's really because we're finally talking about it. What do you say to that?
Oh, I think it is increasing. Also, physician suicides are increasing. Physician burnout is increasing. And I think this is a new problem that comes along with this corporate medicine and this doctors on the treadmill treating the electronic medical record instead of their patients.
Well, I'm glad Jiggy brought you on this program.
This has definitely been a interesting topic here. We've got Dr. Jane Orient with us today, and Dawn, she is just a wealth of information, my friend.
Yes, and more importantly, she's willing to share it. I know I'm getting an education. I hope our audience is as well. It's so much nicer to have someone like yourself talking about these issues. You know, the politicians all talk about it, but they seldom seem to even approach solutions. Well, if you had a chance to talk to Congress or the president, what would you tell them to do?
Get the government out of medicine. These politicians make promises, but they have no understanding of what's going on.
Yeah, but it seems the Democratic candidates seem to not want to get out. They seem to want to go further in.
Well, they want to get rid of private medicine, private insurance. They want all doctors dependent on the government, which means all patients are dependent on the government. They promise them everything for free, but the patients just haven't figured out that if it's not there, they can't have it. They won't get a bill, but they won't get any care either.
I agree wholeheartedly. You know, it's funny. When I was in Denmark with my mother, she fell, and the care was first rate and everything. But as I was leaving, the nurse said to me, "Yes, that's because she was a foreign visitor, but it would not be the case if she was a Danish citizen." And I didn't know at the time what she meant by it, but now I do. I just feel strongly that if we had a one-party system, we'd all lose.
It's called Monopoly. Don't you remember that game you played as kids? You know what happens when you don't have any competition and you're not accountable, and people have no choice but to come to you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Then the game becomes no longer becomes fun. Anyway, many years ago, I covered an incident where one player attacked another player over a Monopoly. I never forgot that story. You're absolutely right. There's so many questions I want to ask you without putting you on the spot. But it seems to me that in order to we almost have to go back to square one with everything and start all over, which would be very difficult to happen. How do you think you could accomplish that?
Well, the APS plan, which is on our website, apsonline.org, proposes, why don't we have freedom for all instead of Medicare for all, that we can't really just collapse the system without causing slaughter and carnage. But why don't we give people the option to get out? And if we have a free market developing, if we have people free to practice where they want to practice, patients free to see the doctor that they want, and find out that, dealing with people one-on-one is not only much more fun, but it's much more economical, then I think that the free market will develop, and eventually people are just going to escape from the socialist trap. And it's just like in East Germany, where they had to have a wall to keep people stuck in East Berlin. If you let them out, they'll go.
Amen. Amen to that. Will you repeat the website so I can write it down, and our guests and our audience can write it down?
Okay, it's aapsonline.org. That's for the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, aapsonline.org.
And how are they versus the American Medical Association, which seems to be diametrically opposed to what you're saying?
I think you got it right there. The AMA is in cahoots with the government. They make their multi-million-dollar revenue by contracts with the government.
And your organization, what does it do? I have to admit, I was not aware of it until just now. So please tell us a little bit.
We defend private Hippocratic medicine. We were founded in 1943. We not all of our members are in private medicine, but all of them do support the idea that the patient-physician relationship is extremely important. It comes first, that the patient should be ahead of everything else. And we provide all kinds of tools to help doctors who are in independent practice.
I'm going to look at your website when we finish this program, because I certainly believe in what you're doing. I think a lot of our audience will as well. Well, we have just a few minutes left. What would you like to leave our audience with?
I think that your audience needs to understand the importance of having a physician who is working for the patient's best interest and not someone who is subject to the government or the corporation or the third-party insurer, all of whom have some goal other than the patient's best interest, saving money for themselves while bringing in a maximum amount of premiums, and really they want to make all of the medical decisions, taking it out of the hands of the patients. Patients need to take back their care. This means they also need to take back their money, and that's why I think medical savings accounts are really important, or just not turning all your money over to an insurance company, but using the old-fashioned ways of saving and spending frugally.
Well, this is the sign-up period, and we're in it right now. And I went to a meeting about Medicare Advantage, and my eyes were open to the fact that there are 6 or 7 different Medicare supplemental plans, and that I have to confess, I still don't understand them, because every once in a while they'll say, I have my drug plan, I've got to pay more, or this one I can't do. And I've never quite understood the regulations. And when I asked someone from the insurance company, she admitted that neither did she. We live in a complicated world.
Well, it's deliberately complicated so that you can't figure it out. And you maybe ask, I know Medicare Advantage is managed care. They have narrow networks. They make all kinds of decisions for you. They want to attract healthy people. They really don't like sick people. And the Medicare supplements you really want to look at those carefully because they are very expensive. And if you look at what they pay for, it may be very disappointing. Like one of my colleagues said the one year they had a really, really bad year. His wife required a coronary artery bypass surgery, that they paid more in premiums that year than that insurance company actually paid out for her care.
I can believe it. Well, but I also learned that some policies you have to pay $150 a day for your first 5 days in the hospital, and after that they pay it up to 30 days. Then you pay more, and I didn't realize that. For some reason I have a G, which is the best plan. I don't pay anything, but I don't get the advantage of having my hearing aid paid for or my eyeglasses paid for. It's just a weird world, and it got weirder.
Well, it's all set up for the benefit of somebody besides you.
I'm afraid you're right. And the next time, I'm still undecided what to do, and I've had 2 or 3 people. So you are so right, Doctor. It's a mess, and it doesn't look as if it's going to get any easier, at least not till after the coming election.
Well, the coming election could be a disaster.
Yes.
You get a dedicated socialist in power.
Well, what really frustrates me is I hear the people talk about everything they're going to spend, but I don't hear anybody talking about cutting taxes. You know?
Well, when they say what they spend, first they got to take it. I think we really should focus on what they're going to take.
I couldn't agree with you more. Right, Jiggy?
Oh, totally agree. Totally agree. Now, Dr. Orient, before we let you go, my friend, how do we find you online and get involved with you and get your books?
The AAPS website is aapsonline.org, and my book is Papyrus, Art and Science of Bedside Diagnosis, and you can find that just by putting in the search engine or going to Amazon.
Now, Dawn, give us some plugs here, my friend. I know that you're involved with a lot of different organizations.
Well, the National Robotics Education